Our guest this morning is Congressman Jamie Raskin, who is currently serving his third term, representing the 8th Congressional District. I don't know if that changes. Maybe you might want to talk about the redistricting in your state and what it looks like, but I think your district currently spans from the DC suburbs to the Pennsylvania state line. The Congressman serves, I don't know how he does it all, but he serves on the House Judiciary Committee, the Oversight and Reform Committee, the Rules Committee, and the Committee on House Administration. He's a graduate of Harvard College, Harvard Law School, editor of the Harvard Law Review. Last year he served, as many of you know, as the lead House impeachment manager and former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. And now he is currently a member of the Bipartisan Select Committee to investigate the January 6, 2021 attack on the United States Capitol. As if his duties on Capitol Hill were not enough to keep him busy, the Congressman is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Unthinkable, memoir detailing the January 6th attack, impeachment trial, as well as his own personal experience losing his son, Tommy, to suicide. Needless to say, we are pleased that he could join us today while he visits Boston. Please join me in offering a very warm New England Council welcome to the Honorable United States Representative Jamie Raskin.
Jim, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here with everybody, and there are some people I've got to recognize. I don't know all of the elected officials, but I know a couple of them. I know Josh Krinsman, who's a Newton councilman and was my student, and I'm very proud of him. And he's got a colleague from the Newton Council, Emily Norton, who's here too. And so I want to recognize them, and of course, the great Congressman Michael Harrington, who I've known now for most of my life, and oh, there's Mike back there. So I see him, and I want to thank all of you guys for coming, and it's a wonderful invitation for me. Massachusetts and New England are very important in my life and my consciousness and my mind, my heart, and I was thinking that there was a year before I went into politics when I was still a law professor, and I spent a year on sabbatical in France, and I was teaching over in Paris in Sciences Po. But I got to know a Jefferson scholar, a French professor who was a Jefferson scholar, and she told me that whenever Jefferson would get up to speak in France, he would say that everybody who loves freedom on earth has two countries, his or her own, and France. And I was thinking about how in America, everybody who loves democracy has two states, his or her own, in Massachusetts. So I feel very close to this state. So thank you. And I got to tour yesterday. You know the way they say that college youth are wasted on the young, and so here I was in college here for 4 years. I was at Harvard Law School for 3 years, and even was an assistant attorney general in Massachusetts for 2 years before I moved back home. But and I had never toured the Mount Auburn Cemetery before, and so I went and I toured it for the first time. It's just astonishing. But Oliver Wendell Holmes was there, and I remembered a story that I heard about Oliver Wendell Holmes, which I never got to use, and I realized I want to use that when I come talk to the New England Council, where Holmes was kind of a famously absent-minded guy, and he got on the train at Union Station in Washington, and he was seated on the train. It was headed north, and the conductor was coming through the aisle and then checking people's tickets, and he couldn't find his ticket anyplace, and he's looking in his pockets, he's looking in his briefcase, but they recognized him as Oliver Wendell Holmes, and they said, Justice Holmes, it's okay. But he kept looking for the ticket, he's looking under the seat, he's looking through his briefcase, and the staff come back and they say, Justice Holmes, really, it's okay, we understand, that you got a ticket, and it's no problem, don't worry about it, we know that you're good for it. And he said, no, it's not a question of where is the ticket, it's a question of where are we going? So, anyway, that's so much, what's on our mind right now, where are we going? And so, I don't know, I thought I would talk for, just a few moments about January 6th, about our select committee, what we're doing, and then to talk about how we move on from this trauma that has rocked our country and that we're still trying to extricate ourselves from. So if that makes sense, I thought I'd talk, it's like 10 minutes, is that about right? And then the floor will be open for anything anybody wants to ask about, any issue, policy question, my book. I know some people bought my book, which was really nice. So, whatever you want to talk about. But, we have this bipartisan committee. Benny Thompson is the chair of it. Liz Cheney is the vice chair of it. It's actually the best committee I've ever been on. Jim mentioned I'm on all these different committees. It's the most bipartisan committee I've been on because we don't begin every meeting and every hearing with an hour and a half of partisan polemics and invective against each other because we all have a common mission, which is we're trying to find out what happened. House Resolution 503, which created us, commands us to determine the events of January 6th, the causes behind the events, and then to make recommendations about how to fortify democracy to prevent similar insurrectionary violence, coups, and instability in the future. So that's that's our charge. We've had more than 800 witness interviews and depositions. We have now more than 100,000 documents relating to what took place, and some things are becoming clear in my mind. But I want to encourage people to think about the events of January 6th itself in three circles of seditious activity. The outer circle was a mass wild protest called by then President Trump through the social media based on weeks and months of propaganda and incitement about the election being stolen. And so tens of thousands of people came, most of them not knowing exactly what to expect, most of them not knowing exactly what they had bargained for. But that mass protest, which began with an assembly down near the White House and then turned into a march, eventually became a violent mob. Okay? And that mob set upon our police officers, 160 of whom ended up with broken jaws, broken necks, broken noses, broken ribs, broken vertebrae, arms, legs, feet. We had several officers who lost fingers, who lost toes. Many ended up with heart attacks or strokes, traumatic brain injury, and post-traumatic stress syndrome now being suffered by dozens of the officers. Okay, that was the outer ring. That was the most innocent wing of the activity on that day. The middle ring was the ring of the insurrection itself, and this was made up of domestic violent extremist groups, white nationalist groups mostly, who had been assembled precisely for the purpose of storming the Capitol, smashing our windows, breaking down our doors, and attacking and overcoming the officers in order to go in to stop the steal, by which they meant to interrupt the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history, which they succeeded in doing. This was the Proud Boys, who Trump had told to stand back and stand by at the first presidential debate. It was the Oath Keepers, it was the Three Percenters. All three of those groups have been charged with seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government. The QAnon networks, the Aryan Nations, different Ku Klux Klan organizations, militia groups, of course not official state militias, but self-declared militia groups, a group that was actually quite important today that people don't know a lot about, called the First Amendment Praetorian, and that was another one of these groups. But there were around a dozen of them. A couple of religious cults were there, including the Unification Church, which actually I didn't know even still existed after the death of Sun Myung Moon, but they were there as well. And then some white Christian nationalist organizations. This assemblage of extremist groups had been organizing for weeks, and many of them had been engaging in paramilitary training and were involved in encrypted communications with each other, planning an insurrection, or some of them called it a revolution, some of them called it a coup, some of them called it race war, some of them called it civil war, but they were clearly planning for violence, and they were clearly planning to come in and to look for enemy politicians and to kill people. The thing that we lucked out about was that when in the 2 days before, as the events began to unfold, their listservs began to say, don't bring your weapons with you to the rally at the White House, because the Secret Service is going to be checking people's bags to make sure that there's no weapons. So the weapons were basically left in people's cars or at their hotels and motels, and the idea was to go back and get them later. That's why the weapons of choice in attacking the officers were baseball bats, steel pipes, American flags, Confederate battle flags, Trump flags, and so on. So that was the middle ring of activity. That was not the scariest ring, okay? The ring of the coup. Now, coup is an odd word to use in American political parlance because we don't have a lot of experience with coups in our own country. Of course, Congressman Harrington, when he was in Congress, blew the whistle on some activities around the coup that took place in Chile against Salvador Allende. But we don't think of America as a place subject to coups. We think of coups as something that take place against presidents. This was a coup organized by the president, against the vice president, and against the Congress of the United States. It's what the political scientists call a self-coup. So it's not a president who's subject to a sudden seizure of power by the military or an outside group. It's organized by an incumbent president against the constitutional process itself. And there are multiple examples in history of self-coups that have taken place. But it's a well-known type, albeit a less common type of coup that takes place. Well, what was the point of it? Well, Donald Trump had been planning to lose the election. He could read the polls very well, and he saw exactly where everything was going. So he began to put out the word, the only way I can lose this election is if it's stolen from me. The only way we can lose it, he began to propagandize his followers, was if there's fraud, if there's irregularity. And then, of course, on election night, when most candidates would concede, or the next day, he simply repeated and doubled down on that interpretation of events. And he said, that they're finding ballots, dropping out of airplanes, they're finding ballots dumped into garbage cans. We were going to win this election. In fact, we did win this election before it was stolen. And he never, to this day, has not backed down from that analysis of the election, and he declared that he was the winner. And then they began a campaign to try to discredit and overthrow the result. And it began with litigation. Fortunately for us, because we have 62 different federal and state judges, 8 of whom were nominated to the bench by Trump himself, who have rejected every single claim of electoral fraud and corruption that has been leveled against elections anywhere in the country. And of course, it was Trump's own Homeland Security director who said it was the securest and the most honest election in American history because of all of the attention to what was taking place. But so there was that judicial effort which failed. Then they went to GOP-controlled legislatures in swing states that Biden had won. So they went to Pennsylvania, and they went to Wisconsin, and they went to Georgia and Arizona, and they tried to get GOP state legislative leaders simply to nullify the popular vote and install pro-Trump electoral college slates. And much to their credit, these unsung constitutional heroes refused to do it. And they said, we've got a voting process, and the election is over here. At that point, they turned their attention to election officials, like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, who is a long-term Republican activist and official who was Secretary of State, and he taped Donald Trump trying to intimidate and browbeat him into committing election fraud. Trump said, all I'm looking for is 11,781 votes. That's all. That's all I want. I mean, hey, I'm a politician. All I want is 11,781 votes. That's not an attempt to ferret out election fraud. That's an attempt to commit election fraud. We've found so far 30 cases of different election officials who were approached directly by Trump or by his lieutenants in an effort to reverse results by fabricating new vote totals. That failed. Again, a bipartisan group of constitutional heroes refusing to destroy an election through fraud. So now they started getting more extreme. Michael Flynn says, let's seize the election machinery and we will have the military simply rerun the election in the contested states. And all of you are aware of that provision in the Constitution, which allows the military to rerun the election, of course. So the Department of Defense refused to do it, the Department of Justice refused to do it, and the Department of Homeland Security refused to do it. But we've got the overtures made, and of course they tried to overthrow Trump's own leadership in the Department of Justice because they would not go along with that plan, and they wanted to install this guy, Richard Clark, who was a mid-level DOJ lawyer who they wanted to put in charge of the Department of Justice in order to execute that. Okay, all that failed. Now it comes down to the cataclysmic moment. It's all January 6th. The 12th Amendment specifies the Wednesday of the first week of January following a presidential election as the day when the House and the Senate meet in joint session in order to count the Electoral College votes sent in by the states. So we're meeting on January 6th. The point of the campaign against Pence was this. We're going to get Mike Pence to declare unprecedented, unlawful, extra-constitutional, unilateral powers to nullify Electoral College votes being cast by the states, sent in by the governors with their certificates of ascertainment based on the meeting of the Electoral College votes in the state capitals from across the country. We're going to get him to reject the electors coming from Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and if he wanted to keep going, they threw in also Wisconsin, Nevada, and New Mexico. But the key ones were Arizona, Georgia, and Pennsylvania. We're going to nullify those. Why? Well, Biden had 306 votes in the Electoral College, which happened to be exactly what Trump had in 2016. Both of those races were 306 to 232. And of course, in 2016, Trump had declared his victory a landslide. in the Electoral College. Well, they were going to overthrow the landslide. They were going to lower Biden's vote total from 306 to below 270. Why? The 12th Amendment says if no candidate has a majority in the Electoral College on January 6th, when the Congress is meeting in joint session, the contest is thrown immediately into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election. And people ask me, well, why would Trump and Bannon and Mark Meadows want the election thrown into the House controlled by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats? Well, they knew that under the 12th Amendment, we're not voting one member, one vote. We're voting one state, one vote. And after the 2020 elections, the GOP had 27 state delegations. The Democrats have 22 state delegations. Pennsylvania is split 9-9. So they're on the sidelines. So it's 27-22. But even had, my new best friend, the at-large representative from Wyoming, Liz Cheney, defected from the GOP, as I think she would have, and probably would have cast her vote for the real Electoral College vote winner, that's still 26 to 23 to 1. They still would have won that. And what they were prepared to do was to seize the presidency based on the contingent election. If they could just get Mike Flynn to do his part, Trump was going to come over to the Capitol. They were going to declare he was the president for another 4 years. And if he had followed the advice of Michael Flynn, as I think he would have, his disgraced former national security advisor, who had ended up resigning after it was found that he'd been lying to the FBI about his contacts with the Russians. If he had followed Flynn's advice, Trump was going to invoke the Insurrection Act and declare martial law, and then call in the National Guard to put down all of the insurrectionary chaos they had unleashed against us. And they'd already prepared a propaganda story, which Matt Gaetz from Florida had already floated ended up floating when we came back to the floor of the House after we were disrupted by the insurrection, which was that this was all done by Antifa, that Antifa had organized the insurrectionary attack. So that was the plan. It really bore an affinity to the Reichstag fire, because he staged insurrectionary chaos and mayhem, and then he wanted to rescue us from it in the course of seizing the presidency in this self-coup for the next 4 years. So that could have happened if Mike Pence had not been a constitutional hero on that day. And I can't pretend that I was a big Mike Pence fan up until January 6th. I mean, to my mind, he had shown far more invertebrate sycophancy for 4 years than anything else. But on that day, he lived up to his oath of office. And not one time, but multiple times, because Trump had summoned him to the White House in the morning. There had been multiple calls where they were getting increasingly hostile. There were tons of death threats. And when the mob broke into the Capitol and the chamber and they tried to barrel their way into the House, the most haunting sound I ever heard, and I will never forget the sound of them trying to charge into the House of Representatives. You could hear the mob chanting, "Hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence." Well, where does a mob of tens of thousands of people get the idea to be chanting, "Hang the vice president," who's serving the president that they're out there fighting for? I mean, where does that idea come from? I mean, I don't know that they knew the intricate constitutional architecture, but they knew that Mike Pence, as Trump kept tweeting, is doing the wrong thing, doesn't have the courage to do the right thing. When we got out to the floor at 1 o'clock on January 6th, we had a memo from Mike Pence that he had distributed to every member of Congress explaining precisely why he could not do what Donald Trump was asking him to do, why he did not have the powers to do that, which was itself a very brave thing. And he was brave all the way through the day. They took him down to the, somewhere in the basement, in the garage. And his Secret Service agents reporting to Trump's Secret Service agents told him, we're going to get you off of the Capitol campus. We're going to open these doors. We're going to speed out of here, and we're going to get out of here. And you know what Pence said? This, to me, the 6 most chilling and in some sense uplifting words I've seen in this entire investigation. He said, I'm not getting in that car. I'm not getting in that car. He said, until we count the Electoral College votes, I'm not. And thank God he did it. So he helped save us. The officers who held the line helped save us so the members could get out to safety. I mean, if they'd gotten in and killed a dozen Democrats, we would have lost our majority in the House. That was another way everything could have gone in a completely different direction. We could have ended up not just with a violent insurrection, which took a half a dozen lives. We could have ended up with a successful coup and possibly, civil war. I mean, who knows where that goes at that point. That's how close we were. So it's as close to fascism as I ever want to come in my life. And it's why I wrote my book about our son Tommy and about what happened a week after we lost Tommy on January 6th, where my youngest daughter Tabitha and my son-in-law Hank, who had eloped without permission with our daughter Hannah to Nevada during COVID-19, and they had an Elvis Presley marriage. They were with us. They were hiding in Steny Hoyer's office right off the floor of the house. They had barricaded themselves in. They locked the door. They pushed all the furniture up the door. They were hiding under Steny's desk. And Tabitha was looking for ways to fill, the hole they have in a desk for the cords to come through. She's looking for a way to fill that up because she thought if the mob succeeded in breaking in, because they were pounding on the door, that they might see them by looking through the hole. But that's how close they felt they were. That's how close we all felt we were. People were calling their wives, their husbands, their children, their parents to say goodbye. And the members were taking the little pins, with these little pins that get us in the buildings, taking the pins off so they wouldn't be recognized. We had Democratic colleagues up in the gallery because, of course, our side, we were respecting the COVID-19 protocols. And so we had a bunch of members who were up in the gallery. One of our colleagues, Susan Wild from Pennsylvania, had a panic attack when the mob broke in. And they basically crawled from that side of the chamber to the other side of the chamber because they thought if somebody came in with an AR-15, which is what we were all thinking, that somebody would show up with an assault weapon because, what do we know other than, the Tree of Life Synagogue and Mother Emanuel Church, in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Walmart. It's the first thing you think. My God, hundreds and hundreds of people are pouring in outside of the metal detectors with no security clearance. So they thought if they could get from that side of the gallery, the Democratic side, over to the other side of the gallery, there was less chance that they would be shot by somebody who showed up with an AR-15. So anyway, I don't want to go into all of that stuff. But if you want to read about it, you can read my book, or you're going to hear about it when we get into our hearings. So the hearings are going to tell the story of what happened, why it happened, how we almost lost everything, who paid for it, what was the basis in propaganda and disinformation and conspiracy theory that led tens of thousands of good Americans to come and be part of this assault on our own democracy, and then what do we need to do to fortify ourselves in the future, all the way from making shatterproof windows and secure doors at ground level and at the second floor level, because a lot of the insurrectionists climbed in, to reforms to the Electoral Count Act, to securing the right to vote in election machinery, because we don't want to be fighting the last battle. I don't think anybody thinks that Kamala Harris is going to succumb to any intimidation to unilaterally reject and nullify electoral college votes. But there's an assault going on right now against voting rights and the election machinery across the country. So I think we will want to do recommendations about that. We're going to talk about potential constitutional changes that might be needed in order to secure the democratic framework. So anyway, I know there are cheerier things that you could be talking about this morning, but I appreciate your paying attention because I do think it's a matter of the utmost solemnity and gravity. I am glad that I'm part of a bipartisan team that is trying to blow the whistle before the whole country about what happened to make sure that everybody gets the truth when we have hearings in May, and we have a report that will be a multimedia report, both in text and in video, to the country about what we found and what took place and what needs to be done. So I'll leave you with the words of the great Tom Paine, who was the namesake for my son Tommy. We named him after Tom Paine, but Paine came over, just 2 years before the Revolution. He fell in love with the promise of America and what we could be, and he said that America would become an asylum for humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people fleeing from political and religious and economic oppression from all over the world. And he said, the cause of America is the cause of all mankind. That the democracy we created here would become a model for democracy and the rights of the people all over the world. I still believe that with all of my heart that Paine was right. But anyway, in 1776, it was a tough time, and half the country saw that vision and was fighting for it, and half the country, didn't know, and people were being loyalists and they weren't sure. And everybody was running around like on my side of the aisle saying, what's the message? We can't message, and what are we saying? But Paine wrote this beautiful pamphlet called The Crisis, and in it he said this, and Speaker Pelosi always makes me update the language so it doesn't offend modern sensibilities. And she said, he was an early feminist, which he was, and was for the right of women to vote. But Paine said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country, but everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. So let's let that victory be ours. Thank you so much for having me.
We have time for a couple of questions. Maybe I just public hearings will begin in May.
Yes.
Okay. And the White House phone log, this 7-hour gap is missing. I know you subpoenaed the president to get those tapes. Any insight?
Well, this was not only the first violent insurrection nearly to topple Congress and interference with the Electoral College proceeding, it was also by far the most well-recorded, televised, and taped, because a lot of the insurrectionists were taping it. We had cameras inside, and so same thing in the White House. There's lots of records. It is suspicious that the call logs disappear for this 7-hour period, which just happens to track the period of the insurrection and the attempt to coerce Pence and so on. But the reason I raise the fact that it's so well documented from so many perspectives is that you might think you're slick in deleting all of your calls, but there are lots of other people who have records of the calls from their end, and there's lots of footage, and so I feel pretty confident we're going to be able to reconstruct everybody's whereabouts and everybody's movements and conversations, and I hope that we will make this discovery. But what I want to say to the American people is, why is it we've had more than 800 witnesses, people coming forward and telling us everything that they know, including members of the former president's family, including the vast majority of people working in the White House and the Capitol, people are coming forward and testifying. But the closer you get to Donald Trump, his immediate entourage, these are the people who are fighting us and are making all kinds of ridiculous arguments about executive privilege. For example, like Mark Meadows and Steve Bannon, who wasn't even working in the White House at the time, and he's asserting executive privilege. You know, the Supreme Court's been perfectly clear. Executive privilege can be asserted by one person, the President of the United States of America. That's who gets it. So, you know, we've got, this last week we had contempt citations. I brought them to the floor for Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro. Peter Navarro's big line everywhere on TV, I see him saying, well, executive privilege is not mine to waive, which is 100% accurate. It's not yours to waive, and it's not yours to assert for the exact same reason. It's not yours. So you can't assert it, you can't waive it. And Joe Biden said there is no executive privilege for Peter Navarro or Dan Scavino. So they say, well, Donald Trump hasn't even attempted to assert it for them. So they're trying to assert executive privilege, which doesn't apply to them because they know a president, a former president, who's not even coming to try to do it. So, I mean, that gives you the level of absurdity of the arguments being brought here. And we want, like, the public to understand that. What are they hiding? Just come forward and tell us what you did. And I don't know if you watched, that was funny the way you introduced me as the leader of the second impeachment trial. It's like everybody's going to get a turn before it's all over. But the first thing I did was I sent a letter to Donald Trump. I said, come and testify. You're proud of what you've done. You sent these people into battle, people's mothers and fathers and people's children. You sent them there to go and fight like hell. And don't give up, and we never give up, and we don't surrender, and we're going to stop the steal. And the rules are very different when we're talking about fraud and all this stuff. And you're willing to put other people's lives on the line. You're not even willing to come and testify about it. What a snowflake he is, total snowflake.
That was my follow-up question, is the discussion about subpoenaing the former president or the vice president, Pence, to the committee.
Well, first of all, I don't know that we would need to subpoena Vice President Pence if we needed more. I think he would probably just come, and the vast majority of people haven't been subpoenaed. You know, and we're not out to, swagger with our subpoenas. Like, that's a big deal, We're using it where people are refusing to come in and testify. So, I don't know about where the committee is on that question, just because it's going to be a fight. He might just like that fight, and he might like that framing of it. And if we don't need him, we don't need him. I mean, we don't, need him to come in and lie. And I don't think his lawyers are going to want to subject him to perjury prosecution for the inevitable lies he will tell. I mean, he's a one-man crime wave, and he can't talk without lying. The scary part is, look, we know, the whole world knows who he is. I mean, the tough part of this for me, speaking as a member of Congress who proudly has a bust of Abraham Lincoln on my desk, because I love Lincoln that much and I inherited it from my grandfather, but that Lincoln's party has become Trump's cult of personality. That is really...
Judge David Carter, I think he has his district is Central California. He made headlines recently when he said it was more likely than not the president committed federal crimes.
Yeah.
Does that carry any weight with the Attorney General?
Well, I would think some. I think it would, to have a United States District Court judge who really familiarized himself with the entire public record. I mean, the New York Times has made a big thing in the last few days about an alleged division of thought within our committee about whether we should make a criminal referral, and I really believe it's much ado about nothing. I mean, our job is to assemble all the information we've got, which of course will be public and available to everybody, and I think the Attorney General and the Department of Justice know how to read, and I think they know how to do their own investigation. A criminal referral from us is not some formal part of the process or anything. That's like anybody in this room calling the Department of Justice and say, I want to report a crime. And if any of you guys want to do that, report the crime, you know. But I mean, I do think the Attorney General is aware of it. But the reason I raise that, Jim, is because Judge Carter's opinion was in response to our filing, where we laid out the potential federal criminal offenses that Donald Trump committed. I mean, it was obstruction of a federal proceeding. You can't do that. You can't interfere with a federal proceeding, which is what they did. Conspiracy to defraud the American people of an election. That is also a crime. You can't commit fraud in a federal election by changing the votes, creating counterfeit electors, you know, concocting a whole conspiracy to overturn essentially what 62 federal and state courts have already determined. I mean, if you think there's a problem in an election, you do the right thing. You go to court, and then you accept it at the end. I mean, you know, there were a lot of people on the Democratic side who had real questions about the election in 2016. But, you know, what did they all do? They put on pink hats and joined Indivisible, but nobody was out there beating up police officers and trying to overturn the election result.
We have a couple of minutes for a question or two. Donahue?
Thank you, Representative. To answer either or both of these, one's looking back, one's looking forward, can you speak to which circle of health the State Attorney General Association, where I particularly might have played in some of the organizational stuff they contribute to? And secondarily, I know it's a little explanatory. Are you concerned at all, or is the caucus concerned going forward about how much money they're going to raise up of the proceedings running up, you know, into the election season this year? Well, unfair though that may be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, if you can raise money off of lies and disinformation, you can raise it at any point, and you can say anything. So, you know, I don't think that, you know, we can make our decisions about how to pursue this process based on that expectation. But you're referring to the Republican Attorney General's group that, but I haven't been involved in so much in that part of the investigation. You know, there was a ton of money raised and a ton of money spent, and this being a Trump operation, there were people taking their cuts at every step along the way. You know, there were some of these, you know, billionaire GOP heiresses who were putting in, you know, millions and millions of dollars, and not even aware everybody who was taking pieces. But the money basically made its way to planes, trains, automobiles, buses, hotels, motels, and so on. But very carefully, no money was spent on security for the rallies, the marches, the protests. There was no program for the big protests at the Capitol, which is interesting because, you know, those of you who've ever been to a protest understand those are generally very well organized and choreographed events. Like, we're going to have, you know, we're going to build a platform, and here's the program, and here's the speakers, and everybody fights to get their, you know, 3 minutes to speak and so on. All that happened down at the White House, but what was the program for the march to the Capitol? You know, millions and millions of dollars raised for it, but nobody knows.
Lenny Glenn?
Thank you, Jim. Congressman, thank you for everything you've been doing, all the way back through the impeachment process. I wanted to ask you to talk to us a bit about your Republican colleagues on this January 6th commission. You know, Kinzinger is not going to run again, but Liz Cheney is definitely running. And what's your impressions of her? What is her ambition? Might she challenge Donald Trump? Might she attempt to bring the Republican Party back to sanity? If there is an election where she runs as independent, should the Democratic Party really not contest or try to help her? I mean, is she that important?
Well, yeah, I feel very strongly about Liz Cheney. I really do, and I write a lot about this in my book. About, I mean, I always liked her. I befriended her early. We entered Congress in the same year, And she's a lawyer and a very good lawyer, and she's a mom of 5 kids, and I think she just has good values, you know, and she also has, you know, an open mind and an open heart. You know, she had taken some positions about her sister, who's gay, which she regrets now, and she's changed her position on marriage equality and on gay rights, and she talks about that. And that, you know, I like to see leaders who can evolve and grow in a principled way, you know, not in a, you know, Machiavellian, sinister way, but in a, you know, and I think that's her, and I think that she's shown exemplary constitutional patriotism in standing up for the truth and for the facts, and she's come under withering assault. I mean, you know, she oftentimes will sit over on our side of the aisle now, and, you know, she and I will sit with each other and hang out, and then Marjorie Taylor Greene or Lauren Boebert or Matt Gaetz will come by and they just say, traitor, traitor, or, you know, they'll, you know. And so you can imagine what it's like, what she's gone through. I mean, in some sense, it's much worse than what anyone on our side of the aisle has gone through, because at least we have a sense of solidarity and, you know, comradeship amongst ourselves. So I think she's done a great job. You know, I don't ask her much about her electoral plans and so on. She's definitely running for re-election. She's getting a lot of support from Republicans who traditionally supported her, a lot from independents, and a lot from Democrats. And in Wyoming, when you arrive at the polls, regardless of how you're registered, you can request the primary ballot of whatever party you want. And so there are tons of Democrats who are saying, I'm going to request the GOP ballot. And she has 2 Republican opponents. So it's an open question what's going to happen there. And some people think that, you know, she's toast. But I think it seems to me like she's got a real fighting chance to hang on to her seat. I think regardless of what happens, she should run for president in the GOP primaries against Trump. And if I had to bet on it, I would say she will run. I just have that sense that she would do it. And if she runs against Trump and she runs on a constitutional platform, and who knows, you know, who knows where he is in his various legal journeys that he's on in Georgia and New York with the DOJ. So who knows, lightning could strike and she could win, and if not, and she gets 15 or 20% of the vote, and if she decides to run as an independent, or she decides to become a Democrat, at least provisionally, we agree on gay rights now, you know, maybe she could come over and I said to Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was, I don't know if you saw this, but she was heckling me all week. It was like the Rocky Horror Picture Show out on the floor of the house. And so at one point, finally, I just blew up at her, and they were going to, I think, like, kick her off of the floor. And I said, no, like, please keep her there, because she's chanting at me, Russia hoax, Russia hoax. And I said, you know, during a week when Putin's army is raping women and killing them and leaving their corpses on the street and shooting children in the face, I want the world to see what Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing, that she's chanting Russia hoax, that she's following her master Donald Trump, who's following his master Vladimir Putin in promoting propaganda, war propaganda against the people of Ukraine. Anyway, so I think that Liz, you know, she's a fascinating figure. She is evolving, you know, I don't see her as a Democrat, clearly. You know, I don't think, and she doesn't see herself that way. But I said to Marjorie Taylor Greene and those guys, I said, you know, we're getting to a point where, because, you know, Kevin McCarthy came down to attack during that same debate Liz Cheney, and I said, we're getting to a point where we have a Democratic Republican constitutional caucus, and then we've got a Putin-Trump caucus. And that's who you guys are standing for right now. 63 of them voted against a resolution that we had to proclaim our support for NATO against Russia, and 63 of them voted against that. It was pretty amazing when you think about it.
You were at the Gridiron dinner
Yes.
Governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, was the talk of the town.
Yes.
You think he's the candidate in '24 for president?
Well, it was funny because I was the Democratic speaker, he was the Republican speaker, and so when he finished, and he basically announced he was running for president, and he also, he used the F word, I think 4 times against Donald Trump. And I said, I got up and I said, Governor, that was a complete, absolute riot. By which, of course, I mean a normal tourist visit. No, I saluted him for his brazenness in separating from Donald Trump.
You think he's running?
I definitely think he's going to run based on what he was saying. And I mean, if you're the governor of New Hampshire, you kind of have a head start in the race for president, I think. I mean, it could be a showdown between him and Trump there. But I don't know much about Sununu, but I was impressed that at least he was willing to take on Donald Trump.
Jack?
Congressman, I'm a guest here today, but I'm here because I've had conversations with some people who are members and reached out to the business community. What can the business community do without damaging their issues that they need to fight for? But it seems to me democracy is an issue that overarches everything we stand for.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for saying that. Business has saved us at a number of points during the Trump years. I believe that really strongly. And I'm a little bit of a persona non grata with some of the younger members of my caucus because I still take business PAC contributions. And they say, why do you take it? I say, well, first of all, I don't want to offend the businesses who are in my district. Secondly, a lot of these are totally progressive businesses that are doing everything right. And the third thing is, when the fascists come calling, we want business to be on our side, So I'm glad that you are where you are and you're doing what you're doing. Look, there was a great debate which did not happen in the 2020 presidential race on the Democratic side, and it should have been a debate between somebody and Bernie Sanders. I don't know if it was Elizabeth Warren or somebody who, Bernie Sanders is a socialist. He says he's a socialist, and I don't know what he means by that. Does he mean he favors state control of all of our business, the means of production and all of our businesses and so on? I mean, it's hard for me to believe that after everything we in the world have been through, that is his position. I don't get it. And if I talk to some of my beloved junior colleagues like AOC and I say, when you say you're a socialist, what do you mean? They generally say, I'm for national health care. I said, Maggie Thatcher's for national health care, That doesn't make her a socialist. If you believe in, the Adam Smith, John Locke idea that part of freedom is people being able to create their own businesses and be innovators and entrepreneurs, don't call yourself a socialist. I don't know why you would do that in American history. I know we've had socialist parties that have contributed a lot to our growth as a country, like Eugene Debs and so on, and the people who fought for child labor laws and fought for, antitrust. But that's a different tradition. And I wish that Elizabeth Warren had challenged Bernie to a debate about that. Antitrust is the opposite of socialism. It's saying, let's make the market work through competition and prevent people from monopolizing. That is the American progressive tradition, not bureaucratic state socialism. And I want business on our side is the bottom line. I do. And businesses have obviously contributed so much to the country. There are also industries that have done the wrong thing and are doing the wrong thing, like the oil and gas industry, the carbon kings today, which are refusing to deal with the reality of climate change. That's why I would never delegate power over any public policy issue to one industry or one industry's lobbyists. But there's got to be a place for everybody to express themselves and to come and, and make their stand. But thank you for saying what you did. You know, I asked my staff right after January 6th, I said, bring me everything that's ever been written about coups. You know, and there's not been too much written about coups. But one thing I learned by studying the coups all over the world, Greece, Italy, Chile, is that the left parties, the liberal parties, can never defeat fascism on their own. It's only when you get the left and the center right together standing up for the constitutional framework that you can defeat a serious fascist politics in a country. So I'm for progressive business. I was proud when I was a state senator, I authored the first benefit corporation law in America. I don't know if you know what benefit corporations are, but it's businesses that want to write a charter, not just like in the Delaware style of for any lawful purpose, but also to do specific things of material public benefit. Like we're going to make a lot of money and we're also going to invest to promote adult literacy, or we're going to clean up this river in our city, or whatever it is, you know. And I think it's in the vast majority of the states now, the benefit corporation law, and lots of companies are taking that on. I think that's what's going to save us, not, you know, and I mean, I love Bernie Sanders as much as everybody else. I know he's a New England person and everything, but I don't think that that is really what we need to be teaching the young people about politics. I mean, Karl Marx said that socialism would replace capitalism in the process of dialectical materialism. In my lifetime, all I've seen is capitalism replace socialism. It's just not worked anywhere, the kind of socialism that they're talking about. So that's as far as I go in economics.
One last question, Jerry.
First of all, I must say the fact that you were able to channel your enormous grief into this purposeful and meaningful work has been a lesson to all of us, and I'm so grateful. Obviously, you can't look at what happened January 6th and not feel like our country is just a wreck and enormously divided, but there's a narrative that's starting to get a little bit of ground about the fact that we're not as divided on certain issues as we are shown to be through the eyes of the media or through examples like January 6th. Where do you stand on that notion that Americans have some common core values and are not?
Oh, I'm totally with that. I think you got to check out Christopher Wiley's book, the young man who defected from Cambridge Analytica. I believe we live in a time of polarization and division because that was a project that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and Steve Bannon had to divide the country. And we've got the means to do it with the internet and the social media, is to embitter everybody along racial, ethnic, religious, ideological, partisan, political lines. You got to read this book because they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we make Trump win? Well, they started analyzing the psychodemographics of the American public. And they discover through, they do these personality profile quizzes that will just pop up on people's Facebook accounts. So they discover, well, 3 to 4% of America is people who fit this psychological profile. They call it the devil's triad of psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. Sound familiar? Okay. They said, these are the people who are not registered to vote, they're not politically engaged, they're marginal. We're going to turn them into political actors. And what do you know? Next thing, we get August 2017 in Charlottesville, right? These people are on the march. You get January 6th, thousands and thousands of these people who've been politicized, they've been registered to vote, they're injecting hatred into the political system and the political process. They're scaring people from going outside to rallies and demonstrations and so on. But that wasn't all they did. I mean, this book is remarkable. They said, all right, well, who are the groups that would never vote for Trump? And so they identified different demographics. One of the demographics was young African-American men. They would never vote for him. But we can get them to hate Hillary Clinton and to turn off completely from the political system. How do we do it? Well, let's continue to run ads throughout the entire campaign about Hillary talking about super predators and Hillary and Bill promoting the death penalty as part of the Anti-Terrorism Sentencing Enhancement Act of 2006, and so on. Let's find out how we can demobilize and demoralize people and turn people against each other. And it just worked like a dream, what they did. So are we polarized and divided? Sure we are, because we've been programmed that way for several years now to think the worst of our fellow countrymen and women. But I'm with you. I think the vast majority of the public still loves America, doesn't want to follow Vladimir Putin and autocrats and dictators abroad, and they don't want to walk the plank with Donald Trump. I think that's where most people are by going around the country. I believe that. And yet, you know, in the field of the internet, these attitudes have come to command a lot of people's attention and emotional energy. So that's a profound problem that we got to figure out how to deal with.
Well, with that, I think we all agree what an insightful, informative discussion.
Thank you so much.